Two men own their golf swings, Ben Hogan and Moe Norman. Hogan's legend is well known. But despite the fact that Moe Norman competed in the Masters, his story is not. Why? Chris Connolly now with the story of Moe Norman, a man who lived far outside the pristine cookie-cutter world of the PGA Tour.
Top PGA legends explain why they hated Moe Norman. That's not clickbait, that's history. The greatest ball striker in golf history became the most hated man on the PGA Tour. Not because he couldn't play, but because he didn't fit their picture of what a champion should look like. Legends like Sam Snead, Ken Venturi, and Jack Nicklaus all played a role in his downfall. Some mocked him openly, others just turned their backs. But the result was the same. A genius was driven out of the game he mastered. If this story shocks you already, drop some hype on this video. It helps us tell stories like this one. Moe Norman could do something nobody else could do. He could hit a golf ball with perfect precision, shot after shot, day after day. Modern physics has proven his swing was nearly flawless, yet he never became rich. He never became famous. He spent most of his career sleeping in his car and bowling for spare change in the winter. Why? Because in the 1950s and 60s, the PGA Tour cared more about how you looked than how you played. And Moe Norman looked wrong. He wore stained clothes, his teeth were rotting. He didn't bathe regularly, he talked too fast and repeated himself. He avoided eye contact. To the establishment, these weren't just quirks. They were crimes against the image of golf as a gentleman's game. The PGA was building a brand. Clean-cut, polished, marketable. Moe didn't fit the mold, so they broke him instead. Let's count down the legends who made sure of it. Number 7. Even Jack Nicklaus, who later praised Moe's ability, admitted the truth. The golfing world shunned Moe because he was different. Nicklaus confirmed it was a collective action. The top legends all agreed. Moe didn't belong. His nomadic lifestyle, his lack of hygiene, these things kept him from being invited to major events. Nicklaus's honesty is rare. Most wouldn't admit it, but he acknowledged the shunning was real and institutional. It wasn't one bad guy, it was the entire system. The irony? Moe's nomadic lifestyle was often a result of the poverty he lived in. Poverty caused by the very people who used it as an excuse to exclude him further. Nicklaus saw the genius in Moe's swing, but he also saw how the establishment treated difference. And he confirmed what Moe always felt, that he was cast out not for his game, but for who he was. Number 6. Ken Venturi offered a different kind of cruelty, intellectual cruelty. When asked why Moe never made it on the US tour, Venturi didn't mention lack of skill. He pointed to unsettling personal habits. Lack of hygiene? This was the official narrative. The tour leadership rationalized his exclusion by framing it as a hygiene issue. But that was a lie, or at least only part of the truth. Moe's rapid speech, his repetition, his avoidance of eye contact, these were symptoms of what we now understand as autism. But in the 1950s, they were just weird, unsettling. The word Venturi used is revealing. Moe made them uncomfortable. And rather than try to understand why, they used his differences as justification for a total boycott. Venturi became the voice of the establishment, the man who explained away their cruelty by calling it standards. He didn't swing a club at Moe. He didn't have to. His words did the damage. By labeling Moe's behavior as unsettling, he gave every player permission to turn their backs. Number 5. Years later, Peter Jacobson wrote about Moe in his book Buried Lies. He described Moe's car, a vehicle that doubled as a home and was filled with rotting food. He talked about Moe's grimy hands, his clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. These stories became locker room legends. They turned Moe into a cautionary tale, a punchline. The irony is crushing. Those grimy hands created the purest golf shots anyone had ever seen. But his peers couldn't separate the genius from the grime. The locker room became a place where social norms were enforced through mockery, and Moe was the favorite target. Jacobson's stories weren't just memories, they were weapons. Each retelling reinforced the idea that Moe was other, that he was dirty, that he deserved to be laughed at. The shock Jacobson described wasn't concern, it was revulsion, and he shared it with everyone who would listen. Number 4. Sam Snead embodied everything Moe wasn't. Polished, charismatic, marketable. Snead wore his signature straw hat and charmed sponsors with ease. When he encountered Moe, he was stunned. the rotting teeth, distinct smell. Snead thought Moe was unmarketable, and in the world Snead lived in, unmarketable meant worthless. This is key. The hatred wasn't just personal disgust, it was economic. The PGA Tour was becoming a business. Television was getting involved. Sponsors wanted clean faces to represent their brands. A man who repulsed people couldn't be the face of anything, so Moe was seen as a threat, not to their games, to their wallets. The gentleman image wasn't just a preference, it was a commercial requirement, and Moe violated it every time he opened his mouth. Snead looked at Moe and saw a liability, someone who could damage the brand they were all building. So he made sure everyone knew, this man doesn't belong with us. Number 3. Cruelty reached its peak at Augusta National. The Masters is golf's most sacred tournament, a place where tradition and decorum are religion. In 1956, Moe Norman qualified to play. He'd earned his spot, but the moment he arrived, the mockery began. Doug Ford was a major champion, a fixture of the era. He looked down on Moe's stained clothing. So did the others. They whispered. They laughed. They made sure Moe knew he didn't belong. Moe had a brutal inferiority complex. He was painfully shy. The ridicule cut deep, so deep that he tried to hide. He slept in his car. He slept in sand traps on the course. Anywhere but the clubhouse where Ford and the gentlemen gathered. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. He quit the tournament, mid-competition, just walked away. Not because he couldn't compete, but because the shame was unbearable. Ford didn't just reject Moe, he humiliated him in front of the entire golf world at the sport's most prestigious event. The message was clear. You don't belong here. And Moe believed it. He came back in 1957. Shot a respectable 74, but nothing had changed. The veteran pros ignored him. Shelley Mayfield, Ed Fergal, Jimmy Demaret. When asked about Moe, they just shrugged. He was a non-entity. Moe himself said he missed the cut because he didn't have enough money to stay for 2 more days. He hitchhiked to tournaments. He didn't own golf shoes. Once he refused to accept $3 in winnings from Dick Chapman out of some misplaced sense of hospitality. The legends didn't see a struggling athlete. They saw someone who didn't understand the rules. Not the rules of golf, the rules of status. And Ford made sure those rules were enforced with maximum cruelty. Number 2, George Knudson took it further than anyone. Knudson was brilliant in his own right, technical master, but he didn't just avoid Moe, he confronted him, face to face. Knudson told Moe he smelled. He told him his teeth were literally a dentist's retirement plan. He gave Moe an ultimatum, clean up or you'll never be a real professional. Think about that. Knudson wasn't questioning Moe's swing, he was questioning his humanity. To Knudson, the smell was a barrier, not a barrier to friendship. A barrier to recognition. Moe could hit shots nobody else could hit. But if he smelled like the car he slept in, none of that mattered. Skill was secondary to presentation. Genius was secondary to soap. Knudson's confrontation was brutal because it was direct. He didn't gossip behind Moe's back. He said it to his face. You're not good enough. Not because of your game, because of your body, because of how you live. Knudson drew the line, and Moe was on the wrong side of it. Number 1. The rejection started closest to home. Al Balding was a fellow Canadian. He worked hard to establish himself as a respected pro on the international stage. He wanted to be seen as polished, professional, elite. Then there was Moe. Balding saw him as a national embarrassment, someone who made Canadian golf look bad. Moe refused to wear clean clothes. He ignored the dress code. He showed up to tournaments looking like he'd slept in a ditch, which sometimes he had. Balding admitted he was cold toward Moe because of his unkempt state. This wasn't about golf, it was about gatekeeping. Balding was telling the world that he wasn't like Moe, that he belonged with the elites, and Moe didn't. The cruelty of Balding's rejection cuts deepest because they were supposed to be on the same team, both Canadians. Both fighting for recognition in a sport dominated by Americans. But Balding chose the establishment over his countrymen. He chose image over loyalty, and in doing so, he set the tone. If even Moe's fellow Canadian rejected him, why would anyone else accept him? The breaking point came in 1959. Greater New Orleans Open. Moe finished 4th, a strong performance. But instead of congratulations, he got a meeting. PGA officials and leading players called him in for a formal dressing down. They had a list of grievances, his antics, talking to the gallery during competition, performing trick shots, his refusal to use a caddy, which they saw as unprofessional, and of course, his appearance. The message was clear. Shape up or ship out. Moe, with his inferiority complex and his inability to navigate social hierarchies, this wasn't a warning. It was an execution. He felt devastated, let down. He vowed never to return to regular competition in the United States. And he didn't. His career on the world's biggest stage was over. The legends didn't see it as bullying. They saw it as weakness. Critics said he ran away, that winners don't run, that real champions don't throw tournaments because they're insecure. This narrative stuck, and it still affects his legacy today. Moe Norman is not in the World Golf Hall of Fame. The reasons given: lack of American PGA Tour victories, failure to conform to tournament rules. Gary Player reportedly spoke of his unprofessional conduct. The hatred from the 1950s still shapes the official history. Even in death, Moe can't escape their judgment. What the legends saw as insanity was actually autism. Moe's obsessive focus on practice, his sensory sensitivities that led to peculiar clothing choices, his social withdrawal. These weren't character flaws, they were symptoms of a neurological condition. But the PGA legends lived in a world that didn't understand neurodiversity. They met difference with aggression. When Moe walked away from fans, they thought he was rude. When he squeezed someone's hand too hard, they thought he was violent. When he held a fellow golfer by the ankles and shook him to see how much change he had, they thought he was dangerous. These were sensory overload reactions, social anxiety, lack of social filters, but to the legends, they were personal affronts, signs of a man who failed to meet the standard of a gentleman. The economic consequences were brutal. Driven off the U.S. tour, Moe was stuck on the Canadian circuit. Purses were tiny. He spent most of his life in poverty, living in motels, sometimes above bars. In the winter, he worked as a pin setter in a bowling alley. While Nicklaus and Snead built massive personal brands and endorsement deals, Moe was knocking down pins for minimum wage. The contrast is sickening. Eventually, Titleist gave Moe $5,000 a month for life. They called it back pay. It was really an admission of guilt, an acknowledgement that the industry had wronged him. They owed him for what they'd taken. The hatred was so deep it affected future generations. Some claim that Moe's behavior at the Masters soured relations between Augusta and Canadian amateur golf for over 50 years. That Canadian amateur champions weren't invited back because of him. Whether that's true or legend, it shows how he was viewed. Not just as a misfit, but as poison. A man whose shadow haunted the sport long after he left. So why do they hate him? It wasn't just one thing. It was everything he represented, a threat to their status. If a man who slept in his car could outplay the best in the world, what did that say about them? Their elite status was exposed as a social construct, not a measure of pure ability. He was a marketing liability. In an era of rising sports commerce, Moe couldn't be sold. His smell, his teeth, his unkempt appearance threatened the tour's ability to present itself as high society. He disrupted their rituals. Golf is a slow, deliberate game. Moe played fast. He didn't use a caddy. He did trick shots. To them, these were desecrations of the gentleman's game. And finally, they didn't understand autism. They saw madness where there was neurodivergence, arrogance where there was anxiety. They hated what they couldn't understand. Moe Norman was the mirror that reflected the limits of their tolerance. He was the greatest ball striker who ever lived. But he wasn't a gentleman. And in the 1950s PGA, that mattered more. Here's the truth they didn't want to admit. Moe Norman loved golf more purely than any of them. He didn't play for money. He didn't play for fame. He played because hitting a perfect shot gave him a feeling of greatness. That feeling was real, even when the world told him he was worthless, even when legends mocked him and officials expelled him, even when he slept in sand traps and bowled for pennies. He kept swinging, and every swing was perfect. The legends played for image. Moe played for perfection. They wore the right clothes and said the right things and built the right brands. He wore whatever he had and said whatever came to mind and built nothing but his swing. In the end, their legacies are polished and institutional. His is raw and human. They're remembered for what they won. He's remembered for what he overcame, or tried to. The tragedy is that he shouldn't have had to overcome anything. His swing was enough. It should have been enough. But golf wasn't ready for a genius who didn't fit the mold, so they broke the mold instead of breaking their rules. Moe Norman died in 2004. By then, some had apologized. Some acknowledged his brilliance. Titleist gave him that monthly check. The Hall of Fame still won't let him in. The establishment still holds the line. They'll praise his swing in documentaries. They'll call him a legend in retrospectives. But they won't give him the one thing he earned. Recognition, not as a troubled genius or an eccentric outlier, but as a champion. A man who played the game better than almost anyone and paid the price for being different. The feeling of greatness Moe chased his whole life? He had it in his hands every time he swung. The legends just refused to see it. And that says everything about them. Nothing about him.